Alright guys, we are back in my garage for another video, and today we are going to be talking about MSA. I wanted to talk about this because I've had a couple people send me screenshots with this code being thrown by their car, and they were basically having issues, and sometimes, they were able to fix everything except for this code, or they just don't really know what it's associated with. And actually, it's pretty simple to fix. That's right. MSA is simply a code related to the auto start stop function. So by turning it back on, you should be able to get rid of that code either through the button above your start stop switch, or sometimes you might have to code it back on if it was coded off in the past. But having talked about that, I started thinking that it would be a good idea to have a video that just discusses how MSA works, as well as if it's even safe to use on your vehicle, and just talk about some of the details and considerations that BMW took when they started implementing this on the B58 engine. So hopefully you guys find this video useful. Now, as always, for everybody that's new to the channel, I create these videos to help keep you updated on the latest developments in our community, as well as discuss technical topics so that we have a better understanding of how our engines work. So if you're interested in more videos like that, be sure to subscribe because there will be a lot more coming out in the future. So MSA is an acronym. As far as I can tell, it stands for Motor Start Stop Automatic. And just like the name suggests, it's basically the automatic start stop of your engine. So this is something that was primarily put into our vehicles to help with emissions as well as gas mileage. When you're sitting idling at a stoplight, you're basically just wasting gas. So this allows the car to automatically turn off the engine when you come to a stop, and then turn the engine back on when you're ready to start driving again. And it's implemented in a pretty complex way. I think a lot of people don't fully understand all of the considerations and details that BMW took when they implemented it on their cars. So I wrote down a bunch of notes so I can kind of run through those details to help you guys understand the full extent of how the auto start stop function works. So like I said, this is primarily used to turn off the car when you come to a stop, but a lot of different things have to be right, and all of the conditions have to meet specific requirements before this will actually work. So in cars with an automatic transmission, it's linked to your brake pedal, and when you slow down the car below 5 miles an hour, that's when the auto start stop function will engage. In a manual car, it's actually linked to being in neutral. So if you clutch in and put the car in neutral and you are below 3 miles per hour, then the car will automatically turn off with MSA turned on. Now, this is going to deactivate automatically in an automatic car when you release the brakes. So basically, when you're getting ready to move over to the gas pedal, the car will turn back on. And in a manual car, it will re-engage when you depress the clutch. So that's an indication that you're getting ready to put it into gear, and the engine will turn back on in anticipation of you trying to start moving the car forward. Now, like I said, a lot of different conditions have to be in place for it to even work. A big one, of course, is the speed. You have to be below that threshold. So 5 miles an hour for an automatic car and 3 miles an hour for a manual car. The car also has to detect driver presence. So the idea is if you put your car in park and turn it off and take off your seatbelt, you don't want the engine to turn back on. So it's basically paying attention to the seatbelt buckle in order to determine whether it's a good idea to turn it on or off. So if it detects that you're getting out of the car, it's not going to try to turn the car back on. Also, the temperature has to be within a specific range. It has to be above 37 degrees Fahrenheit, but below 95 degrees Fahrenheit. So if it's outside of that range, the engine is going to keep running, either to help keep the engine up to operating temperature if it's too cold, or to make sure that you have appropriate cooling if it's too hot. Also, the vehicle interior temperature has to be within an appropriate range. So if you have the automatic function turned on in your car and it's still trying to warm up or cool down the cabin, then the car will not automatically turn off at a red light. Also, the engine itself has to be warmed up. So it's going to be monitoring the engine temps. And if your coolant and oil is not up to operating temperature, the car will not turn off. So you guys might have noticed when it's really cold outside, the first couple stops when you're driving away from home, headed to work or whatever, the car won't turn off at a stoplight, and that's the reason why. Also, the vehicle battery must be charged, so if it finds that it's at a low state of charge, the car won't turn off. The vehicle also could not be switching from reverse. So, for example, if you're reversing out of a parking spot and it senses that the car comes to a stop below that speed threshold, it's not going to turn off. It's only going to do that if you're already in drive and it senses that you come to a stop. The steering wheel movement is also monitored. So, if you start turning the steering wheel, the car will turn on because it's anticipating that you're getting ready to make a move. Also, if you're in traffic, it's not going to turn off. And the way that it detects stop and go is basically if you've gone below that speed threshold. So again, 3 miles an hour in a manual car, 5 in an automatic car. If you're accelerating and coming to a stop, but you don't get above that threshold again, it assumes that you're in stop and go traffic. So just inching forward, it won't continue turning on and off and on and off over and over. But it has to sense that, it'll stop the first time, but after a while it should catch on to what your driving conditions are so that it doesn't keep turning the engine on and off. Also, if you put it in sport mode or manual mode, it will not turn off the car. If you're parked on an incline, in certain cases, depending on how steep the incline is, it will not turn off the car. And one other one that I can't confirm, but on my car it seemed to happen, is if you have certain faults with emissions or potentially sensors that are related to these conditions, then the car will not turn off. And I think it's because it can't tell certain scenarios are correct in order for it to safely turn the vehicle off. On my car, I had an emissions related code because I was deleting stuff that I wasn't supposed to, and I realized that the auto start stop wasn't working anymore. And once we were able to hide that code, it started working again. So certain codes and diagnostic faults prevent the auto start stop function from working. Now, if you are in a scenario where the engine turns off, but one of those parameters begins to go outside of its required range, then the engine will turn back on as well. So, for example, if you're sitting at a light and it starts noticing that the car is getting too cold or too hot, you have your automatic climate functions on and it's not able to maintain that temperature, the car will turn on to help keep the cabin comfortable. Also, if it senses any windshield fogging, it'll turn back on so that it can defrost the windshield. If the battery charge begins to drop with, the radio and everything running in accessory mode, and it senses that it needs to turn the engine back on to charge the battery, it will turn it back on. And also, depending on moving the gear selector, it will also turn back on. So what some people do is when they're in drive, they might come to a stop, the engine turns off, and they put the vehicle in park because they know they're going to be sitting for a while. If you move the gear selector to neutral, drive, or manual and sport mode, then it'll turn the vehicle back on, even if your foot is still on the brake, because it's anticipating you're getting ready to move. So obviously an extremely complex, matrix of requirements are in place to make sure the car is only turning on and off when the conditions are right. But even in those cases, there are several times a day where the car will be turning on and off where it wouldn't be in a car that didn't have this feature. So BMW had to go above and beyond when they were designing the engine to make sure that it could handle the extra stress and wear and tear that comes with starting and stopping the car over and over. One of the main things that they did was adding an Irox coating to the bearings in the engine. And they've actually documented this pretty well in some of the technical documents for the B58 engine. And you can see what the coating looks like. It's really noticeable because it's bright red. And this is something that's basically going to reduce the friction in the bearing, even when there's no oil between the bearing and the crankshaft. So this is designed for the worst case scenario because obviously when the engine is running, your oil pump is turning over and pushing oil to all of the sensitive components. If the engine is off, then that oil is going to begin to drain back to the oil pan. So this just helps ensure that when you turn the engine back on, you have an appropriate amount of low friction material between the crankshaft and the bearing so that it's not going to experience any excessive wear during those multiple starts and stops throughout the day. Now they're only putting this on the top bearing, and the reason is because they see this bearing side as having the most load put on it, which I think makes sense. Obviously when the piston is moving up, the crank is pushing up on that bearing shell. And when you're going through the combustion process and it's pushing the piston down, that's also the same bearing shell that's applying a force to the crank. So that was the one that they found to be the most critical and required that actual coated bearing. And also you can just see in this image kind of how the coating works. So there are of course going to be small defects inside of the metal bearing, and this kind of fills in all of those cracks and crevices to provide a nice smooth finish. So if you guys are into detailing, you might see this is similar to, you know, what wax or ceramic coating your paint does. It just fills in the blemishes and smooths it out so that, you know, water doesn't stick to it. When you wash the car, dirt comes off of it easier. And this is kind of that same principle. By applying this coating, it smooths it out so that you're getting that slick finish to reduce friction, even if you don't have that thin layer of oil between the metal material. So this is a really big deal. These things are highly regarded, even in built engines. They recommend reusing the stock bearings in a lot of cases because this feature helps reduce wear across the board. Even if you're not using the auto start stop function, it just adds additional safety to the engine. Now, oil in the engine isn't the only thing we're worried about. We're also worried about hydraulic fluid getting to the transmission. And it has a similar issue where when the engine is off, certain pumps are not going to be driving the hydraulic fluid through the transmission the way you would want. And in order to make sure that you have the most fluid pressure necessary to easily and smoothly get the car moving from a stop, they actually have a hydraulic pressure accumulator built into the transmission. And what this does is it holds fluid. So during those scenarios, before the engine is turned on, it can actually push the fluid out and create the pressure that's needed to shift the car and get things rolling. So even in the transmission, there are things that they did to compensate. Also, the car has a beefier starter. It's actually designed with stronger components so that it can handle the extra abuse. It is a more expensive unit, so this isn't something that you would typically put in another car that didn't have these kinds of environmental conditions with it starting and stopping over and over. So it is a little bit more expensive if you ever do have to replace it. But just by starting with a stronger starter, you ensure that it'll last as long as a typical starter in a more conventional engine. And then finally, one last thing I found was that they're using a DC-DC converter to actually make sure they're reducing the dips in voltage when the car is turning on and off over and over. And this is something that can cause damage to your electrical components. Obviously, in BMWs, the electronics can be extremely finicky. So it's nice to know that they added this converter to help ensure that the voltage stays constant. As far as I can tell, they put this primarily in cars that were highly optioned with like navigation and things like that. So they added this extra converter for those extra electronics and the additional load that's on the electrical system with all of those features. But yeah, I think I just wanted to talk about this because in my last video, I mentioned how I've actually had auto start stop enabled in my car for several years without an issue. Personally, I feel like it's not that big of a deal, and a lot of people are probably not going to experience any issues with their engine due to auto start stop because of the additional things that BMW put in place to compensate for it. No matter what, your engine is going to be experiencing wear as you drive your car. It's wearing down slowly. And so these beefier design features are going to help ensure that it can last as long as any other BMW engine. You can kind of be the judge for what that actually means, but I've had good luck with mine, and I feel like it won't be any different with the B58. So let me know if you guys have had any different experiences. I know a lot of people just turn it off by default, but maybe some of you have just been daily driving a stock car and you're just seeing this video for a little more information. And I'm just curious what your experience is, because I feel like I said a lot of times this is getting blown out of proportion as something that's just going to cause your engine to fail in 30,000 miles, when really there are several 100,000 plus mile B58s out there. So yeah, that's it for this video. Thank you guys for watching, and I hope this helps. And if you have any other questions or comments, leave them down below.